The studio is quiet, almost eerily so. A single spotlight hovers over the grand piano, casting long shadows across the polished floor. And then, that bass line. It cuts through the silence like a pulse, low and relentless. Dum 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 dum, dum 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 dum. It's simple, unforgettable, yet beneath its perfection lies something far more complicated. Something obsessive, something dangerous. Behind that legendary rhythm, Michael Jackson was not smiling, not dancing, not performing for millions. He was alone. Alone with a song that demanded everything from him and still somehow never seemed finished. This was Billie Jean, but not as the world would hear it. Not yet. Behind the hits, behind the silver glove, there were 91 takes. 91 attempts to capture a single song, a single moment, a single feeling. Why 91? Why would someone who had already conquered the world still risk unraveling over a song that would ultimately define him? Some say it was perfectionism. Others whisper it was obsession. Some even call it madness. But it was none of those things, at least not in the way most people understand them. Michael Jackson's process was a battlefield, and every note was a soldier. Every beat a skirmish. And Billie Jean? It was the war. Each take was an attempt to wrest control from chaos, to capture the ghost of a feeling that lived somewhere between fear, desire, and guilt. Jackson would not settle for good. Not for great, only perfect, only eternal. The song demanded the truth of his soul, note by note, breath by breath. And if he failed, he would do it again. And again. Imagine being in the room with him. The lights dimmed. The microphone glowing softly like a sentinel. Musicians holding their breath. Producers scribbling notes in silence, afraid to break the fragile tension. The piano strikes its chord. The drum machine clicks in. Jackson's voice, sometimes smooth, sometimes trembling, cuts through. And then he stops, not satisfied. The room exhales, but only briefly, because he begins again, and again, and again. This is the story of Billie Jean. Not the story of a pop hit, but the story of a genius wrestling with something bigger than fame, bigger than music, bigger than himself. And by the end of this journey, you will understand why a song that seems effortless, that seems eternal, was born from obsession, vulnerability, and 91 painstaking attempts at perfection. The question isn't just why he recorded it 91 times. The question is, could anyone else survive the process? And more importantly, did Michael himself survive it? Before the song existed, there was a story whispered in the shadowed corners of fame, a story Michael Jackson could never say aloud. Billie Jean was inspired by a woman who never existed, or perhaps by many women who did. It was a story of accusation, of scandal, of vulnerability exposed under the harsh lights of celebrity. And yet it was personal too, a reflection of Jackson's own experiences, his fear of judgment, and the loneliness that fame could not erase. In the early 1980s, Jackson was at the pinnacle of pop culture, yet he lived in constant scrutiny. Every move, every glance, every relationship analyzed, dissected, and often misrepresented. He needed a song that would capture the weight of that attention, the paranoia, the exhilaration, and the terror of living under a microscope. Billie Jean was that song. The first sketches of the melody were simple. A bass line, a drum pattern, a few tentative lyrics. But Michael wasn't content with simplicity. He needed the music to breathe, to live, to tell the story in a way that was both universal and intensely intimate. Every syllable, every note had to carry emotional truth. And it wasn't enough for him to think he had captured it. He had to feel it in every fiber of his being. He would play the initial demo to his team, and they would marvel at the magic in his voice. Yet Michael would hear something missing, an emotion that hadn't been fully exercised, a fear that hadn't been confronted, a vulnerability he had yet to lay bare. That first session ended in silence, not applause. Musicians and producers exchanged glances. They knew they were witnessing genius, yes, but also a relentless, unyielding drive that would soon push them all to their limits. Even at this stage, the song was alive. It pulsed, it breathed, it demanded more, and Jackson, alone with the piano or the drum machine, felt its pull. It wasn't enough to perform it. He had to inhabit it. He had to become Billie Jean. And if he couldn't, the song would not forgive him. By the end of those first sessions, a pattern emerged. Michael would record, listen, critique, and record again. Sometimes it was a vocal take that needed perfection, other times a subtle rhythm or harmony, but the story was never finished, never complete. Each attempt revealed another layer of the song's emotional core, a layer that demanded yet another take. And so, what seemed like a simple pop song began to grow into a monumental challenge. The world would never see this version, this crucible of creation. But inside that studio, every note mattered. Every pause mattered. Every breath was a choice between authenticity and mediocrity. And as the sessions continued, it became clear that Billie Jean was no longer just a song, it was a test. A test Michael Jackson was determined to pass. Mini cliffhanger. And yet, even in those earliest sessions, a sense of unease lingered. Something was tugging at him. Something the world could not understand. The more perfect he demanded the song be, the further away it seemed to drift. Could he ever capture what he truly felt, or was the song destined to torment him forever? Michael Jackson was known for his charm, his dance moves, his iconic performances, but in the studio he was a different force entirely. Perfectionism was not a trait, it was an obsession, and Billie Jean was its battleground. He would listen to a single phrase over and over, searching for the exact emotional inflection, the tiniest nuance in timing. Sometimes he would pause mid-verse, shake his head, and start again, muttering under his breath. Every syllable had to be precise. Every note had to carry weight. The rhythm, the harmony, the vocals, they were all threads in a tapestry that he alone could see. And if one thread was out of place, the entire fabric unraveled. Collaborators recall hours that stretched into nights. Engineers and producers grew weary, but Michael's intensity never waned. He wasn't driven by ego, he was driven by truth, by the desire to capture an emotion so raw, so authentic, that listeners would feel it as if it were their own. This obsession wasn't indulgence. It was necessity, and it was exhausting. Yet there was beauty in his obsession. Each repeated take was a layer peeled back, revealing something deeper, something more human. He wasn't just creating a song, he was creating a mirror, reflecting fear, desire, and guilt in ways the world had never heard before. Every note carried weight, every silence spoke volumes. But perfectionism has a price. Hours turned into days, days into weeks. Frustration mounted. Michael would sometimes retreat, pacing, whispering lines, questioning himself. "Is this right?" he would ask. "Does it sound like me?" His team learned not to answer. The answer didn't matter. What mattered was his relentless pursuit of something that could not be measured, only felt. And yet there was a sense of urgency beneath the obsession. The world was waiting. The song had to exist, not tomorrow, not later, but now. Every take, every note, every breath was a step toward that impossible goal, perfection that could resonate for generations. Mini cliffhanger. But even as Michael pushed himself to the edge, the song seemed to resist him. For every perfect take, there was another flaw hidden beneath the surface, another emotional truth waiting to emerge. And so, the obsession continued, pulling him deeper into a labyrinth from which there might be no escape. The studio was no longer just a room filled with instruments and microphones. It had become a battlefield. Producers, engineers, and session musicians found themselves caught in the gravitational pull of genius and obsession. Michael Jackson was no longer just a performer. He was a force, an unyielding presence whose standards were as sharp as a razor. Every session began with optimism. The first few takes flowed smoothly. The rhythm section locked in, the bass hummed, and the drum machine clicked with precision. But it never lasted. Soon Michael would stop mid-track, tilt his head, and whisper, or sometimes shout, "Again! Just one more take. One more time to get it right." And he didn't just mean technically correct. He meant emotionally correct. Every note had to convey the exact fear, longing, or accusation the song demanded. Collaborators remember the tension in the air. The silence after a failed take was heavier than the music itself. Even the slightest misstep, a breath too long, a hesitation too noticeable, would trigger a restart. It wasn't just the musicians who felt it. Producers were constantly on edge, walking a fine line between admiration and anxiety. They had never seen an artist demand so much from himself, or from everyone else. Some felt awe, others felt terror, and yet no one dared complain. They were witnessing the creation of something extraordinary, even if it came at the cost of their patience. The room became a pressure cooker. Hours melted into days. The same phrases were sung over and over, sometimes dozens of times. Michael would experiment with subtle changes, holding a note a fraction longer, emphasizing a consonant differently, altering a harmony. Each tiny adjustment could transform the entire song, but it could also ruin it. Arguments erupted. Creative disagreements were inevitable. One engineer might insist the vocal take was perfect. Another musician would argue the timing of a snare drum was slightly off. Michael listened silently, sometimes nodding, sometimes shaking his head. And then he would make a decision that no one could question. Again, he would say, and the team would obey, knowing that each repetition brought them closer to brilliance, or closer to exhaustion. Despite the tension, there were moments of magic. Occasionally, everything would align: the beat, the bass line, the vocals, the emotion. Michael would smile, a rare, fleeting smile, knowing he had touched something that words could not describe. But those moments were brief and often elusive. The obsession that drove him to perfection also ensured that the song was never truly finished in his eyes. Mini cliffhanger. By the end of one particularly grueling session, a sense of unease hung over the room. One take had felt close, so close, but Michael wasn't satisfied. He whispered to himself almost inaudibly, "Not yet. Not yet." And the team knew that the next take would either break him or produce something legendary. 91. The number has haunted the story of Billie Jean for decades. 91 takes, 91 attempts to capture the perfect expression of a single song. To some, it's evidence of obsession or madness. To others, it's a testament to genius. But what does it actually mean? And why has this number become such a mythic part of Michael Jackson's legend? First, let's separate myth from reality. Some sources claim Michael recorded 91 full takes of the song in its entirety. Others suggest the number includes vocal lines, harmonies, and even multiple attempts at a single phrase. What is certain is that Michael returned to Billie Jean obsessively, again and again, until every detail matched the vision in his mind. This is not unusual for artists at the pinnacle of their craft. Beethoven rewrote symphonies endlessly. Picasso reworked sketches for months before committing to a canvas. But Michael Jackson's case stands out because of the intensity, the speed, and the emotional stakes. Every take of Billie Jean was a quest not for commercial success, but for truth. He wasn't satisfied with a hit. He wanted immortality. He wanted to make listeners feel the same fear, guilt, and tension he experienced while singing it. Collaborators insist that Michael's obsession was not born of vanity. He didn't care about being better than anyone else. He cared about being truthful. The numbers, 91 takes, 100 takes, more or less are less important than the principle behind them, that music, when done right, has to resonate at the deepest level of human emotion. And yet, there was a cost. Some musicians grew tired, some engineers grew anxious, and Michael himself was pushed to the brink. The repeated takes were not just physical, they were psychological. Each attempt forced him to revisit the emotions he was channeling, the fear of accusation, the loneliness of fame, the vulnerability of telling a story that mirrored his own life. In this sense, the numbers become almost poetic. Each take represents a struggle, a confrontation with self-doubt, a demand for perfection that few could understand. And while the world listens to a song that seems effortless, smooth, and perfectly crafted, the truth behind it is anything but. It is a story of obsession, yes, but also of courage, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to art. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the 91 takes is how they transformed Billie Jean into more than a song. They transformed it into a statement about the human spirit, how far one can push, how much one can endure, and what is possible when talent meets relentless determination. Michael Jackson didn't just record a song 91 times, he recorded a glimpse of his soul 91 times. each one revealing a little more of the man behind the glove. Mini cliffhanger. And yet, even with all this effort, one question remained unanswered. Which take would ultimately become the version the world would hear? Which of the 91 attempts captured the perfection he sought, the truth he demanded? And what would it cost him to reach that elusive final take? Billie Jean is more than a pop song. On the surface, it's catchy, rhythmic, and unforgettable. But beneath the melody, beneath the groove, lies a torrent of emotions that most listeners never consciously notice. Fear, guilt, loneliness, accusation, desire, all wrapped into one deceptively simple narrative. And Michael Jackson demanded that every take carry the weight of those emotions. From the very beginning, Michael understood that the song had to resonate with truth. He didn't just sing about Billie Jean as a character. He embodied the feelings behind the story, the isolation of being misunderstood, the tension of suspicion, the vulnerability of being exposed. Every breath, every pause, every note had to convey that psychological landscape. In the studio, this meant revisiting feelings that were deeply personal. Michael would close his eyes, imagining the story unfolding in front of him. The accusatory whispers, the glances from strangers, the fear that innocence could be questioned. He relived all of it in order to convey authenticity. And if a take failed to capture that precise emotional intensity, he would do it again, and again, and again. Collaborators described sessions where the air seemed charged, almost electric, with the weight of what Michael was channeling. At times, it was exhilarating, a kind of shared communion with genius. Other times, it was suffocating. One musician recalled how a simple verse could take 30 takes before Michael declared it real enough to feel. 30 times. Not until the performance mirrored the raw truth in his mind would he stop. And it wasn't just about hitting the right notes. The emotion had to seep through every element of the track. The rhythm, the harmonies, even the subtle backing vocals. Michael obsessively crafted each layer so that nothing could dilute the intensity. He wanted listeners to feel the paranoia, the loneliness, the weight of being scrutinized, as though the song itself were a mirror reflecting human vulnerability. What's remarkable is that, through this relentless pursuit, Michael Jackson elevated Billie Jean from a simple pop song into something mythic. The repetition, the obsession, the relentless refining, all of it contributed to a musical experience that transcended entertainment. It became almost a psychological experiment. How much emotion could be extracted from a song before it revealed the innermost truths of the performer and the listener? Yet this emotional intensity came at a cost. Michael had to relive these moments, confront his fears, and navigate the vulnerabilities of his own psyche over and over again. It was draining, sometimes even terrifying. But he understood that the song demanded it. The pursuit of emotional truth was non-negotiable. Mini cliffhanger. And just when the team began to think they understood the depths of his obsession, Michael would demand another take, sometimes later that night, sometimes the next morning, pushing the emotional limits of everyone in the studio. The question lingered. How many more attempts would it take before the song finally spoke the truth he sought? If the emotional core of Billie Jean pulled Michael Jackson inward, the pressures of innovation and tradition pushed him outward, into uncharted territory. Michael was no ordinary pop artist. He was a visionary. He wanted not just a hit song, but a revolution in sound, rhythm, and performance. And that ambition collided with the weight of expectation from the record label, the industry, and the public. Producers and executives wanted a track that would sell millions, that would dominate the charts, that would fit neatly into the existing pop landscape. Michael wanted none of that. He wanted to redefine the landscape, to bend it, reshape it, and force listeners to experience pop music in a way they had never imagined. This tension between commercial expectation and artistic innovation created a silent war within the studio. He experimented constantly. A bass line might shift subtly between takes. The percussion could be doubled or removed entirely. Vocal inflections were tested in countless variations. Michael pushed boundaries with rhythms that felt both futuristic and timeless, with harmonies that hinted at emotional complexity beyond the average listener's comprehension. Every experiment carried risk, too avant-garde, and it might alienate listeners. too safe, and it would betray his vision. His team often struggled to keep up. Some questioned whether the experimentation was necessary, whether the repeated takes were productive or indulgent. But Michael wasn't aiming for convenience. He was aiming for immortality. Every iteration of Billie Jean was a step closer to a version of the song that could shock, enthrall, and endure. Innovation also demanded confrontation with tradition. Michael's vocal phrasing defied expectations, his beats toyed with conventions, and his insistence on perfection in every layer challenged even the most seasoned engineers. Each take became a negotiation between what had worked in pop music before and what had never been attempted. Michael's obsession was not simply technical, it was philosophical. He believed music could carry emotion as clearly as words, and he refused to settle until Billie Jean demonstrated that truth. And yet, even in the midst of this creative storm, the human element could not be ignored. Michael's insistence on innovation collided with fatigue, tension, and doubt. The studio was a pressure cooker of ideas, emotions, and expectations. One wrong note, one imperfect rhythm, one misaligned harmony could derail hours of work. And Michael, ever the perfectionist, would not allow compromise. Through this relentless pursuit, the song evolved. What began as a story of accusation and paranoia transformed into a sonic masterpiece, a composition that married emotional intensity with groundbreaking rhythm and production. Every beat, every vocal nuance, every subtle layering of instruments carried the imprint of his obsession. Billie Jean was no longer merely a song. It had become a carefully orchestrated experiment in human emotion, innovation, and storytelling. Mini cliffhanger. Yet even as Michael Jackson moved closer to perfection, the next challenge loomed, the final take. One attempt would ultimately capture the magic the world would hear, but which one? And how would the culmination of 91 attempts finally reveal the truth behind the obsession, the genius, and the unyielding drive that had brought Billie Jean into existence? The studio doors closed, shutting out the world. Outside, the city buzzed, the streets thrummed with life, but inside, time seemed suspended. Here, every heartbeat, every breath, every note mattered. Michael Jackson's sessions for Billie Jean were legendary not only for their length, but for the intensity hidden behind those closed doors. Collaborators often describe the atmosphere as electric, fragile, and sometimes terrifying. Engineers whispered about moments when Michael's focus became almost otherworldly. He would isolate himself, replaying a section of the song repeatedly, listening intently, dissecting each vocal inflection, every microsecond of timing. A slight hesitation could trigger a restart. A missed note could dissolve hours of work into frustration. And yet, these same sessions produced moments of transcendence, moments when magic seemed to pour directly from him, untouchable and awe-inspiring. There were moments of levity, too, rare glimpses of the man behind the perfectionist. Michael could laugh at a mispronounced lyric or a missed beat, teasing the team lightly before returning to the work at hand. These flashes reminded everyone that this was not just obsession, it was devotion. Michael was relentless, yes, but he also cared deeply about the people he worked with, trusting them to bring his vision into reality while pushing them and himself to limits most could not endure. One producer recalled a night that stretched into early morning. Michael had been recording a harmony line for hours. His voice was raw, hoarse, but he refused to stop. "One more," he whispered, and the team obeyed. As the take played back, there was a silence that felt almost sacred. Every note, every subtle inflection carried weight. When it ended, Michael nodded quietly, a rare expression of contentment. That take, he said, felt true. But not every session ended in triumph. Sometimes frustration boiled over. A single line repeated dozens of times could push Michael to tears, anger, or withdrawal. These moments revealed a vulnerability few outside the studio ever saw. Billie Jean was not just a song. It was a mirror, reflecting not only the story of its fictional protagonist, but also the inner conflicts of the artist himself. And then there were the breakthroughs. Occasionally, after hours of repetition, a moment would arrive when all the pieces clicked. The rhythm, the bass, the vocals, the emotion. These rare instances transformed the song from a mere track into an experience, one that could convey terror, desire, guilt, and longing all at once. Michael called these living moments, moments when the song truly spoke the truth he had been chasing. Mini cliffhanger. But even after these moments of brilliance, one question remained. Could he capture that magic consistently? Could the next take, or the next, surpass what had already been achieved? The tension inside the studio suggested that the ultimate revelation was still ahead, waiting for the right moment. As the sessions dragged on, an unspoken awareness grew among the team. The final take was approaching. Michael Jackson, ever perfectionistic, knew that the culmination of hours, days, and perhaps weeks of labor would determine whether Billie Jean achieved the timeless quality he demanded. The stakes were monumental. This was not a mere song. This was a test of his genius, his endurance, and his ability to capture truth in sound. Each previous take had brought them closer, but it was never enough. Minor imperfections lurked in the harmonies, slight hesitations in the rhythm, fleeting moments where the emotional intensity waned. Michael scrutinized every detail, replaying each take endlessly. His ear, tuned to nuance, could detect shifts invisible to anyone else. A single vocal inflection or timing adjustment could alter the song's entire emotional resonance. The pressure was compounded by the awareness of history. Michael knew the world would listen. Millions of fans, critics, and fellow artists would dissect every beat. The final version could not only define a career, it could define a generation of pop music. And yet, within that awareness lurked a paradox. The more he tried to perfect the song for others, the more he had to perfect it for himself. Authenticity demanded that each take reveal his inner truth, not just satisfy expectation. Michael's obsession became almost ritualistic. He would start each session in silence, sometimes pacing, sometimes whispering lyrics, occasionally humming fragments to himself. Engineers and producers waited in quiet anticipation, knowing that when he finally stepped up to the microphone, every take could last hours. And sometimes it did. Several takes blurred into one another, a continuum of struggle, discovery, and refinement. But amid this relentless pursuit, a strange alchemy occurred. The repeated takes allowed Michael to inhabit the song fully, to explore its emotional landscape in a way few artists ever could. He became both performer and character, observer and participant, storyteller and story. Each iteration peeled back layers of vulnerability, revealing a rawness that transformed the song from entertainment into something unforgettable. And yet, there was always the question haunting the studio. Which take would finally capture it all? Which take would reconcile the perfection he demanded with the imperfection inherent in human emotion? Michael did not rush. He knew that true genius, like truth, could not be forced. Every false start, every near-perfect attempt, was part of a larger journey toward a single, irreplaceable moment of musical clarity. Then came the quiet night before the breakthrough. Tension was palpable. Every team member sensed it. The weight of expectation, the pressure of history, the exhaustion, and the hope coexisting in the same room. Michael adjusted the microphone, tested the drum machine, whispered lines under his breath. And then, as the first notes of the next take echoed through the studio, there was a strange stillness, a sense that the culmination was at hand, mini cliffhanger. But even at this critical moment, nothing was guaranteed. One missed beat, one faltering phrase could undo everything. The final take loomed like a precipice, Michael Jackson's moment of triumph, or the edge of frustration. The question remained, would Billie Jean finally achieve the perfection he had pursued through 91 relentless attempts? The studio lights glowed softly, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, time seemed suspended. Inside, every heartbeat, every breath, every pulse of the drum machine mattered. Michael Jackson stepped up to the microphone, his focus absolute, his mind attuned to the song in a way that transcended technique. This was it, the culmination of 91 takes, countless hours, and a relentless pursuit of perfection. He closed his eyes and inhaled. The bass line began, steady and hypnotic like the heartbeat of the universe. The drums clicked in precise rhythm, a metronome against which the song's story would unfold. Michael's voice emerged, smooth yet trembling with subtle intensity. Every syllable was deliberate, every pause loaded with meaning. He sang not just to perform, but to inhabit the narrative, to make the song live in the listener's soul. For hours he moved through the verses and choruses, layering emotion upon precision. The room was silent, save for the instruments and the whisper of his own breath. Engineers and producers held their collective breath. They had seen brilliance before, but this was different. This was the fusion of technical mastery and raw human emotion. Every nuance mattered. How he elongated a note here, softened a consonant there, and added an almost imperceptible hesitation at exactly the right moment. The tension was unbearable, yet electric. Michael paused, listening intently to the playback. He analyzed it, dissecting every millisecond of sound. And then, with a subtle nod, he began again. Not because the previous take was bad, but because perfection is a moving target. He pursued the essence of the song, its truth, like a sculptor chiseling a masterpiece from a block of marble. Minutes turned into hours. One layer followed another. Harmonies, backing vocals, rhythmic subtleties, emotional inflections, all converged in a delicate balance. And then something shifted. A note, a pause, a whisper of emotion clicked into place. The song breathed in a way it never had before. It was alive, vibrant, urgent, and perfect. Not just technically, but spiritually. Michael paused once more. The silence was profound, as if the room itself was holding its breath. And then he exhaled, a single, almost imperceptible motion that carried the weight of every struggle, every late night, every repeated attempt. He smiled softly, a quiet acknowledgement that this was the take that would endure, the take that would define Billie Jean for generations. The team exhaled. The tension melted into awe. They had witnessed a moment of genius that was impossible to fabricate. A single take that embodied 91 attempts, each one a stepping stone toward this ultimate revelation. This was the culmination of obsession, devotion, and human artistry. Mini cliffhanger. And yet, even in triumph, one question lingered. Could anyone truly comprehend the sacrifices, the relentless pursuit, and the genius that birthed this song? Could the world hear it and understand the emotional and creative journey that had brought it to life? Billie Jean was complete. The song that seemed effortless, timeless, and iconic had emerged from the crucible of obsession, creativity, and relentless pursuit. The 91 takes were not a testament to madness, but to devotion. Michael Jackson had poured his soul into every layer, every note, every pause. He had demanded truth, and the song delivered it. Looking back, the story of Billie Jean is as much about the man as it is about the music. It is about vulnerability, discipline, and the extraordinary lengths an artist will go to capture authenticity. Michael's perfectionism was not vanity. It was a relentless drive to convey human emotion in its purest, most powerful form. It was a commitment to excellence that transformed a single song into a cultural phenomenon, a story that resonated across generations. Every listener who hears the bass line, every fan who remembers the hypnotic rhythm, unknowingly experiences the product of those countless hours. The sweat, the tension, and the emotional intensity. The song becomes more than entertainment. It becomes a conduit for empathy, allowing listeners to feel fear, longing, and vulnerability as if it were their own. That is the genius of Michael Jackson, to make the intensely personal universal. The legacy of 91 takes is a lesson in artistry. True greatness is rarely effortless. It is forged through persistence, vulnerability, and an unyielding demand for authenticity. Michael Jackson's obsession with perfection was not mere quirk or eccentricity. It was the engine that propelled him toward creating something eternal. Billie Jean exists not just because of his talent, but because of his refusal to settle, his relentless pursuit of truth in music. And yet, there is a human lesson in all of this. The journey of Billie Jean reminds us that genius often walks hand in hand with struggle, that the pursuit of perfection demands sacrifice, patience, and courage, that behind the icons we idolize lie stories of relentless effort, emotional labor, and a willingness to confront one's own vulnerabilities. For Michael, the final take was more than a technical triumph. It was a spiritual one. It was the culmination of countless nights wrestling with doubt, fear, and ambition. It was proof that obsession, when guided by purpose, can transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. And it was proof that music, in its highest form, has the power to communicate truths that words alone cannot. As the final notes of Billie Jean faded into history, the world received a song that seemed effortless, perfect, and eternal. But beneath its flawless surface lay the story of a man who dared to demand more than the ordinary, who dared to seek truth in every beat, and who, through 91 relentless attempts, gave the world something unforgettable. Closing reflection. The story of Billie Jean is a reminder of the power of persistence, the beauty of obsession when tempered with purpose, and the extraordinary courage it takes to pursue perfection. Michael Jackson's legacy is not just in the music he left behind, but in the example he set for every artist who dares to chase the impossible. And now, every time we hear that bass line, every time we hum that rhythm, we are not just listening to a song. We are witnessing the echo of 91 attempts, 91 moments of struggle, 91 pieces of genius that converged to create something timeless. Final call to action, natural, cinematic. Reflect on the obsession, dedication, and genius behind the music you love. Consider what it takes to create something truly extraordinary. And when you listen to Billie Jean next, listen closely. You are hearing the culmination of 91 attempts and the brilliance of a man who refused to settle for anything less than perfection.